Welcome. Before we step into tonight's disturbing true story, tell me where you're watching from, and make sure you subscribe, because uncovering real historical accounts like this takes deep research, cross-checking records, and hours of digging into forgotten sources. What you're about to hear is not folklore. It's a chilling case buried in history, where two wealthy twin brothers believed power made them untouchable, until their cruelty awakened something they never expected. 39 rich twin brothers tormented an enslaved mother, and just 3 hours later, they stood face to face with her 2.2m-Tall son. This is a story about arrogance, suffering, and the moment fear finally found those who thought themselves above consequence. The twin brothers were born into one of the wealthiest families in their county, their lives marked by luxury, entitlement, and the assumption that money and status placed them above the rules that governed everyone else. From a young age, they were praised for their intelligence and physical prowess, and their father, a powerful plantation owner, constantly reminded them that their wealth made them untouchable. They grew up in sprawling mansions, attended the finest schools that money could buy, and were surrounded by servants who anticipated their every need. Everything they wanted was given without question, and every act of defiance or insolence from others was swiftly punished by the adults around them, reinforcing a sense of supremacy that became deeply ingrained in their personalities. By the time they reached adulthood, the twins were notorious not just for their wealth, but for their cruelty. They had inherited their father's plantation, along with the authority to control the lives of everyone who worked there. Unlike their father, who maintained a strict yet measured discipline, the twins thrived on intimidation and humiliation. They would challenge each other to see who could elicit more fear from the enslaved people under their authority. Simple mistakes, perceived slights, or even quiet murmurs of dissent could result in days of punishment or public shaming. Their games were calculated. They knew exactly how to push boundaries without seeming to break the law, exploiting the system to satisfy their desire for control. Neighbors and visitors often commented on the twins' arrogance. They strutted through town in expensive clothes, laughing at those they considered beneath them, boasting about their conquests and wealth. Their reputations were both feared and envied. Within the plantation, the enslaved population learned quickly to stay silent, to obey without question, and to hide any trace of personality or strength, because to attract the attention of the twins was to risk cruel and inventive forms of punishment. Their sense of superiority was absolute. They believed the world existed for their amusement, and that the people they controlled were nothing more than pawns in a game. Only they could play. What made their cruelty even more dangerous was their partnership. Being twins, they understood each other instinctively, and their actions often came in pairs. One brother would provoke, the other would enforce. They would plan elaborate humiliations for those they considered defiant, taking pleasure in watching fear spread across faces that had no recourse. The enslaved people whispered to each other about the twins' cunning and ruthless nature, knowing that even the slightest act of retaliation could be fatal. Every insult, every punishment, every manipulation was carefully calculated, and it seemed as if nothing in the world could stop them. Yet, beneath their arrogance, there was a dangerous underestimation. They assumed that physical dominance, wealth, and social status could shield them from consequence. They had no reason to believe that anyone, especially someone born into servitude, someone they had tormented relentlessly, could ever rise to match their power. This overconfidence would prove to be their fatal flaw. They did not understand that cruelty sows its own reckoning, and that those who appear powerless are often quietly measuring, waiting, and preparing. In their minds, the plantation, the town, and the people around them existed solely for their amusement. This illusion of invincibility made the twins blind to the danger that was about to arrive, and to the extraordinary force. The towering son of the woman they had tormented, that would shatter the illusion in just 3 short hours. Their entire identity was built on privilege and dominance, and until that day, no one had dared challenge it. But their arrogance, their belief in their untouchable status, and their obsession with instilling fear in others set the stage for the reckoning that history would never forget. The twins' rise of privilege, unchecked power, and cruelty laid the foundation for a moment that would turn terror back upon them, proving that no amount of wealth could defend against the force born of suffering, rage, and a son's protective wrath. The enslaved mother was a woman of quiet strength, a figure of endurance who had carried the weight of the plantation on her shoulders in ways that few could understand. She had borne the daily burdens of labor that left her hands cracked and her back bent, tending to the fields, the livestock, and the household chores imposed by the twins' relentless demands. Beyond the physical toll, she endured the psychological terror of living under the gaze of 2 young men whose cruelty knew no bounds. Every day, she watched them manipulate and dominate everyone around her, inflicting humiliation for their amusement, testing the limits of what fear could achieve. Yet despite their power, she carried a fierce determination to protect what little she could: her family, her dignity, and, above all, her children. Her torment at the hands of the twins began subtly at first. They would mock her in front of the other enslaved people, calling her names meant to belittle her intelligence and reduce her humanity. Then came the tasks designed not out of necessity, but out of spite. Carrying water buckets far heavier than needed, cleaning floors that had already been swept, tending the fields under the scorching sun without rest. Any sign of fatigue or resistance was met with punishment: a whip across the back, a mocking laugh, or orders to repeat a chore dozens of times. These punishments were calculated to humiliate, to break her spirit in front of everyone, reinforcing the twins' perceived supremacy. Yet, the mother endured. She learned to survive by reading the subtle cues of the twins' moods, by moving with careful precision to avoid their attention. Her resilience was a quiet defiance, one that went unnoticed because it did not fit the pattern of rebellion they expected. She endured their taunts and tricks, never raising her voice, but quietly preparing, watching and learning. She observed the plantation, noting which of their tactics caused the most fear, which of their habits left them vulnerable, and how their arrogance blinded them to the very people they dominated. Her children were her secret focus. She knew that protecting them meant more than feeding and clothing them. It meant instilling in them the strength and awareness to survive in a world designed to crush them. She taught them subtly about observation, about understanding people's weaknesses, and about when to speak and when to remain silent. Her son, already showing signs of extraordinary size and strength, became the focal point of her silent planning. She could see, even as he grew, that he was unlike any other child on the plantation, and she understood instinctively that he might one day become both protector and avenger. The torment escalated when the twins grew bored with subtle intimidation and sought more daring forms of cruelty. They would corner her in private moments, demand answers to questions she had no way to satisfy, and stage scenarios designed to frighten her into obedience. Yet, despite these daily assaults, she never let fear dominate her mind. Every insult, every lash, every threat became part of her understanding of the twins, the patterns of their cruelty, the boundaries they crossed, and the arrogance that made them believe they were untouchable. Other enslaved people noticed the quiet fire within her. They whispered to one another about her endurance and her wisdom, marveling at her ability to survive in ways that seemed impossible. Unlike others who bent entirely under the twins' cruelty, she retained a presence, a strength that could not be crushed. The fear that the twins instilled in others seemed to stop short when it came to her. She met their arrogance with a steady calm that unnerved even the most hardened overseers. It was this quiet strength that would ultimately serve as the seed of retribution, a force the twins could not anticipate. Her torment was not only physical, but deeply psychological. She knew the twins took pleasure in making her feel powerless, in convincing her that nothing she did could protect her children. But she used that very torment as a tool, channeling it into preparation and patience. The labor she endured, the insults she absorbed, and the cruelty she witnessed became lessons in human weakness, lessons that her son would one day act upon. By enduring, she transformed suffering into strategy, ensuring that when the moment came, her family would not be crushed by the twins' arrogance. In those final hours before the confrontation, she was calm in a way that defied logic. She had spent years anticipating the day when their cruelty would meet resistance, and she had raised her son to be ready. Her torment had not broken her. Instead, it had shaped a calculated resolve that the twins could never see coming. Every smile, every word, every taunt they had delivered had been catalogued in her mind, stored as knowledge for the one moment when their arrogance would meet consequences far beyond their imagining. Her endurance, her intelligence, and her unwavering courage became the cornerstone of the story that would unfold in the hours that followed. She was the invisible force behind the confrontation, the quiet strategist who had survived torment that would have destroyed most, and who had prepared a son capable of turning fear back upon the oppressors. In enduring the unendurable, she became the center of a story that history would remember, not for the cruelty inflicted upon her, but for the strength she revealed in response, a strength that would change the lives of everyone on that plantation forever. The final act of humiliation carried out by the twin brothers was not sudden. It was the culmination of a pattern of cruelty that had been building over months. That morning, they awoke with a particular hunger for amusement, one that could only be satisfied by targeting the enslaved mother whom they had tormented for so long. They had grown bored with the usual displays of power, the whipping, the taunts, the endless menial tasks, and craved something more elaborate, something theatrical that would cement their reputation for dominance among both the enslaved people and the few white neighbors who admired their arrogance. They began by sending word to the enslaved mother to appear in the main courtyard at midday, knowing that she would have no choice but to comply. The midday sun was harsh, blazing over the plantation, the heat reflecting off the walls of the mansion to concentrate on her thin, wary frame. When she appeared, the twins were already there, adorned in their finest attire, standing as if on a stage, eyes glinting with the cruel expectation of the audience. They smirked at the assembled workers, giving the unmistakable signal that a spectacle was about to unfold. The act of humiliation they had planned was meticulous. One twin carried a small whip, while the other held a bundle of dirt and soiled linen, items meant to degrade her further. They forced her to kneel in the courtyard, demanding that she recite a series of statements that mocked her role, her status, and her ability to care for her children. With each word she was coerced to speak, the twins laughed, their voices echoing off the walls, magnifying the spectacle for maximum effect. Surrounding workers watched in silence, fear rooting them to the spot. None dared intervene, for years of punishment had taught them the consequences of resistance. What made this humiliation especially cruel was the twins' attention to detail. They had studied the mother's every mannerism, every expression, every trace of pride or resilience, and now they exploited them with precision. When she tried to maintain a dignified silence, they forced her to speak, twisting her words to make her appear foolish. When her eyes filled with tears, they mocked the emotion, calling her weak and incapable. Every lash of the whip, every flung object, every pointed remark was choreographed to inflict maximum psychological and emotional pain, turning her suffering into entertainment. As the act continued, the courtyard seemed to pulse with tension. The twins had underestimated the simmering strength beneath her endurance. While she appeared small, defeated, and vulnerable, inside, her mind worked relentlessly. She calculated every detail of the twins' positions, their body language, and the likely patterns of their actions. She observed the weak points in their posture, the arrogance that made them predictable, and the fatal oversight that they would never notice the storm growing around them. Hours passed, though to the twins it seemed like mere moments, as they executed their plan to humiliate her fully. Their laughter grew louder, crueler, as the assembled workers shifted uncomfortably, watching their torment without a voice to protest. And then, at the peak of their arrogance, they demanded the ultimate act of submission, that she kneel and present her child to them, a final symbol of control meant to break her spirit completely. They had no idea that this demand would be the turning point, the final step that would awaken a force they could not have imagined. The enslaved mother complied outwardly, but every movement was calculated. Her son, who had been hidden nearby under her watchful eye, had grown far larger and stronger than the twins could have expected. By the time they demanded his presence, he was already standing close enough to hear every insult, every degrading order. The twins, focused on the spectacle and the mother's apparent submission, did not notice his movements, his rising shadow, or the subtle shift in the air that heralded his approach. The courtyard, once a theater of humiliation, was about to transform into a stage of reckoning. The twins' confidence, which had carried them through years of cruelty, blinded them to the approaching consequences. They believed the act would end with their dominance reaffirmed, the mother humiliated, and the workers cowed further into silence. Yet, the mother's endurance, the careful preparation she had instilled in her son, and the unpredictable force of natural strength and righteous anger converged in a moment the twins could neither foresee nor counter. In the final moments before the confrontation, witnesses later described an almost surreal scene, the twins, laughing, full of arrogance, standing tall in their finest clothes, oblivious to the height, the power, and the presence of the sun behind them. The mother remained kneeling, her face calm and composed, concealing every ounce of anticipation. The sunlight glinted off the boy's towering figure, casting a shadow over the twins in a way that seemed impossible, unnatural even. The tension was palpable, a quiet before a storm, as if the plantation itself was holding its breath for what was to come. This meticulously planned act of humiliation, designed to reinforce power and terror, was instead the catalyst for their downfall. Years of cruelty, arrogance, and unearned confidence had lulled the twins into believing that nothing could challenge them, that no one could rise to meet their dominance. And yet, the enslaved mother's patience, resilience, and foresight had orchestrated a reversal so complete that it would be remembered for generations. The moment the twins finally faced the son of the woman they had tormented for years was unlike anything anyone present had ever witnessed. Hours of cruelty and mockery had set the stage, and the midday sun cast harsh shadows across the plantation courtyard, glinting off the twins' polished boots and the ironwork of the surrounding fences. They had believed that they were in total control, that the mother's quiet endurance would never translate into action, and that their dominance was absolute. But in that moment, all their assumptions were about to shatter. The boy emerged from the shadows like a force of nature. He had grown far beyond the expectations of those who had known him as a small child. Standing at an astonishing 2 meters, his presence alone was commanding. Even the seasoned overseers and laborers, who had long endured the twins' arrogance, froze as they saw him. His broad shoulders and towering frame were accentuated by the calm, deliberate way he walked, each step echoing with purpose against the wooden planks of the courtyard. There was no hesitation in his gaze. His eyes were focused, locked on the twins who had caused so much suffering to his mother and countless others. The twins, initially confident and sneering, froze as well. They had anticipated resistance in some form, perhaps anger, perhaps defiance, but nothing prepared them for the sheer scale of power and presence before them. Their laughter faltered, then died entirely, replaced by the sudden, cold awareness that they were no longer in control. For the first time in their lives, they were confronted by something they could not dominate, something that their money, status, and cruelty could not influence. The courtyard seemed to change around him. Shadows stretched unnaturally, as if the sun itself was bending to mark his arrival. The air grew heavier, thick with a tension that pressed against the ribs of everyone present. The enslaved mother remained kneeling nearby, her face calm, but her eyes reflected relief and determination. She had endured years of torment, and now her son embodied every ounce of strength and protection she had instilled in him. The twins, who had wielded fear like a weapon, were now faced with a living embodiment of retribution. As the boy stepped closer, the scale of the twins' miscalculation became painfully obvious. Their mockery, their arrogance, their carefully orchestrated spectacle of humiliation, all of it seemed petty and foolish in the shadow of his height and presence. One of the twins instinctively straightened, attempting to reclaim some semblance of authority. But the gesture only made him appear smaller, more vulnerable. The second twin glanced nervously at his brother, his eyes flicking to the other men present, searching for an ally or some way to escape. But there was none. The boy's deliberate calm left no openings, no weakness, and no chance for negotiation. Witnesses later recounted the silence that fell over the plantation. Even the wind seemed to pause as the confrontation unfolded. The boy's eyes, dark and unwavering, locked onto the twins, conveying a message more powerful than any words. The cruelty they had inflicted would not go unanswered. His sheer presence was enough to unnerve the twins, to strip them of the confidence that had carried them through years of unchecked domination. Their dominance, so carefully cultivated, evaporated under the weight of this sudden, undeniable power. The first twin attempted to laugh, a nervous, high-pitched sound that failed to mask the terror creeping into his chest. The second twin swallowed hard, his face pale, his previous bravado gone. The boy did not raise a hand, did not speak. He merely stood, imposing and unrelenting, and the effect was absolute. The twins could feel every eye on them, every whisper of the workers who had suffered silently under their rule, and they understood instinctively that the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. Then, the mother stepped forward slightly, her presence reinforcing her son's authority. She did not speak, but her gaze carried years of endurance, of strategy, and of unwavering resolve. It was a silent command, a declaration that the era of the twins' cruelty was over. The courtyard, once a stage for humiliation, had become an arena of reckoning. Every step the boy had taken toward them had been deliberate, each one carrying the weight of accumulated injustice and righteous anger. The twins realized, in a terrifying instant, that all their schemes, all their wealth, and all their societal advantage meant nothing. This was not a confrontation they could control or escape through charm, fear, or intimidation. The boy represented the embodiment of their miscalculations, the result of years of abuse channeled into a force they could neither anticipate nor resist. The air was electric with the impending collapse of their power, as if the land itself recognized that justice, in its rawest form, had arrived. In those moments, history paused. The workers, hidden behind doors and windows, dared not breathe, knowing that they were witnessing the culmination of years of cruelty and endurance. The twins' fear was palpable. It radiated from them, filling the courtyard with a tension so thick it could almost be touched. The son's silent stance, his commanding height, and the calm fury in his eyes conveyed a single, undeniable truth: the era of terror had ended, and the consequences for the brothers' actions were about to be realized. This encounter, simple in action but monumental in impact, marked the turning point of the story. The twins' arrogance had brought them to a place they could not dominate, facing a force that was as physical as it was moral. And in that courtyard, under the scorching Alabama sun, the first real moment of reckoning unfolded. A confrontation where fear finally found its target, and the oppressed finally had a protector powerful enough to enforce justice. The 3 hours that followed the initial confrontation became a nightmarish blur for the twins, a period of time that seemed to stretch far beyond the normal limits of human perception. What had begun as a silent stand off in the courtyard quickly escalated into a tense, psychological battle, each second layered with dread, fear, and the looming sense of consequences that the twins had never before faced. The sun, towering and calm, did not rush toward them with violence, nor did he shout or threaten. Instead, he moved with deliberate patience, his eyes never leaving theirs, communicating a silent authority that was impossible to ignore. For the first time in their lives, the twins felt powerless, stripped of the comfort that wealth, status, and social influence had always provided. Initially, the twins tried to maintain their arrogance, attempting to laugh off the situation as a mere prank or an illusion, some trick of the light or exaggeration by the other workers. But every subtle movement the boy made shattered that illusion. His shadow stretched unnaturally in the scorching sun. His footsteps left impressions in the dirt far larger than his age should have allowed, and his presence alone seemed to distort the air around him. The twins could feel their confidence eroding with every heartbeat, replaced by a creeping terror that lodged itself in their chests. They began to realize that the stories whispered among the workers were not exaggerations. This child, the son of the woman they had tormented, was extraordinary in every possible sense. During the first hour, the twins attempted to regain control using the tools that had always served them: intimidation and threats. One twin brandished a riding crop, waving it in a manner meant to assert dominance. The other tried verbal threats, mocking the son's mother and claiming that no child could ever challenge the power of their family. Yet every gesture, every word, seemed only to highlight their vulnerability. The boy's eyes, steady and unblinking, conveyed no fear, no hesitation. It was as if he had anticipated their tactics for years, as if every act of cruelty inflicted upon his mother had been a blueprint for the moment he now occupied. The second hour deepened their terror. The son moved with calculated precision, positioning himself in ways that blocked any possible escape. The twins tried to rally their own courage, taking advantage of their height, their numbers, and their familiarity with the courtyard. But the courtyard itself seemed to amplify the boy's presence. Every plank, every shadow, every open space reinforcing the unnatural dominance he projected. The twins were trapped not by chains, by ropes, or by any physical barrier, but by the oppressive certainty that any sudden move would invite immediate consequences they could not predict or survive. The workers who watched from the sidelines, hidden but attentive, could see the change in the twins' demeanor: laughter, replaced by stuttering attempts at speech, bravado replaced by hesitation, and arrogance slowly corroded into paralyzing fear. By the third hour, the twins were completely undone. Their earlier mockery had shifted into frantic negotiation, promises of wealth, assurances that no harm would come to them, and pleas to the son to relent. They attempted every tactic they had ever seen work on others: appeals to logic, threats of retaliation, even invoking their family name and social influence. Yet none had any effect. The boy remained steadfast, his presence alone a force of justice, a living embodiment of every slight, every insult, every act of cruelty his mother had endured. The twins could see, in the slight flare of his nostrils or the subtle narrowing of his eyes, that he understood the measure of their fear, and that he knew exactly how far to push before the reckoning would be irreversible. Throughout those 3 hours, the mother herself remained close but in the background, a quiet anchor of calm that underscored the inevitability of what was unfolding. Her son's actions were not chaotic or impulsive. They were deliberate, a reflection of her careful guidance and the strategy she had instilled in him from birth. The twins' attempts to dominate, to force a response, only revealed their ignorance, They had never faced someone who combined patience, strength, and moral certainty into a single, unshakable force. Each passing minute amplified their dread. They were prisoners of their own arrogance, trapped in a psychological prison created by the sun's calm, commanding presence. Witnesses later recounted that even small movements or gestures by the sun carried tremendous weight. When he shifted his stance, the twins instinctively stepped back. When he tilted his head or lifted a hand slightly, it seemed to indicate control over the entire space. The twins were acutely aware that one misstep, a sudden rush, an attempt to escape, or an ill-considered attack, could provoke a response that would overwhelm them physically. And yet, the sun never struck, never raised his voice, never made a threat beyond his presence. That was the true terror, the understanding that action was imminent, that the twins' humiliation and punishment was inevitable, but that it would come on the terms of the sun, not theirs. By the time the 3 hours had passed, the twins were physically pale, mentally exhausted, and utterly broken. Their arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by a profound recognition of vulnerability they had never before experienced. The courtyard, once a symbol of their absolute control, had transformed into a space of reckoning. Every witness knew that the twins would never again wield power without fear, that their cruelty had invited a force capable of dismantling it in mere hours. In those 3 hours, the plantation had witnessed the collapse of privilege, the triumph of endurance and strategy, and the terrifying arrival of justice in its most immediate, personal form. The aftermath of that fateful day was unlike anything anyone on the plantation, or in the surrounding county, had ever witnessed. The twins, once figures of absolute authority and terror, were utterly transformed, stripped of the arrogance that had defined their lives. Their wealth and social status, which had always shielded them from consequence, now seemed meaningless. For the first time, they experienced fear not as a fleeting emotion, but as a tangible, paralyzing force. Even the overseers and neighboring planters, who had once admired their dominance, began to avoid them, sensing that something had shifted. An invisible boundary had been crossed, and the twins were no longer untouchable. Word of what had occurred spread quickly, first in hushed whispers among the enslaved people, and then cautiously among the white families in the region. The story was difficult to articulate, because it defied the expectations of the time. 2 men of privilege had been rendered powerless in mere hours by a young man born into servitude. Every witness recounted the son's imposing presence, his deliberate control, and the way the twins' confidence crumbled under his gaze. The tale became one of whispered warnings, a narrative told to children and laborers alike to illustrate the hidden strength and resilience that could arise from oppression. For the twins themselves, the psychological impact was immediate and profound. Their nights were haunted by memories of the sun's towering figure, the unwavering stare, and the cold, deliberate calm with which he had confronted them. Sleep offered no refuge. Dreams replayed the confrontation over and over, each iteration leaving them smaller, weaker, more exposed. They began to doubt every assumption they had ever made about power and control, recognizing with growing horror that wealth and status could never protect them from consequences born of courage, strength, and righteous anger. The plantation itself became a silent witness to the aftermath. The laborers and enslaved families moved differently after that day. carrying themselves with a quiet pride and newfound confidence that the twins could no longer suppress. Tasks that had once been performed under a heavy hand of intimidation were now approached with subtle defiance. Even the animals seemed to sense the shift in energy. The plantation, long dominated by fear, now carried the weight of something unyielding and unshakable. Those who had lived under the twins, Rain understood that they were witnessing more than just a personal reckoning. They were seeing the collapse of a system that had long relied on terror to maintain order. The mother, who had endured years of torment, finally allowed herself a moment of relief. Her plan, cultivated through quiet observation, patience, and careful guidance of her son, had succeeded. She had transformed fear into strategy, suffering into preparation, and endurance into power. The sight of her son standing tall and commanding in the courtyard was proof, not only of his physical strength, but of her ability to nurture resilience and justice in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Though her life remained circumscribed by the harsh realities of enslavement, this victory marked a turning point, a moment when her family asserted its presence in a world designed to deny them agency. The twins' social standing never recovered. Though outward appearances remained, they still lived in the family estate, maintained their wealth, and continued to attend social gatherings. The aura of invincibility that had once surrounded them was gone. Neighbors, aware of what had transpired, treated them with cautious distance, no longer seeing them as untouchable figures of authority. Within their own household, the fear of retaliation became a constant presence. Every glance, every shadow, every subtle movement reminded them of the day they were confronted by a force they could neither control nor escape. Years later, stories persisted among the local community about the day the twins faced the sun. The account was repeated not only as a tale of revenge, but as a lesson in humility and respect. Children were warned about arrogance. Laborers were reminded that even those in positions of power were vulnerable, and the story of the mother's endurance and strategy became legendary. The plantation itself carried the echoes of that confrontation. Even after the twins eventually passed, whispers of their reckoning persisted, a testament to the events that had shattered their authority and reshaped the dynamics of power on that land. For the son, the aftermath was a mixture of responsibility and quiet vigilance. He had fulfilled the role his mother had prepared him for, asserting a presence that no one could ignore and ensuring that the cruelty he had witnessed would not go unanswered. Yet he remained cautious, understanding that the world was still fraught with danger, that the same systems of oppression still governed the lives of countless people around him. His actions had not only defended his family, but had served as a powerful symbol that courage, resilience, and justice could emerge from even the most constrained circumstances, and that true strength was measured not by privilege or wealth, but by character, determination, and moral clarity. In the end, the story of the twins, the mother, and her towering son became more than a singular event. It became a legend of enduring power, of the reversal of roles, and of the human capacity to resist oppression through cunning, patience, and courage. It was a reminder that cruelty, no matter how entrenched or amplified by wealth and social status, carries the seeds of its own reckoning, and that even the most powerful can be brought low when confronted by the strength born of suffering, love, and an unbreakable bond between a mother and her child.